Well, hello, podcast people. Welcome to another awesome episode. I'm your host, Eris Abner, and joining me in the digital studio is Thumper Forge. He is the author of a new book coming out soon called The Chaos Apple through Llewellyn. And it's great to have you here, Thumper.
I am excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thumper is a Gardnerian witch, initiated into that practice, and also has ties with Discordianism. And this new book is all about chaos magic, what it is, what it isn't, and kind of unraveling some of the mysteries around it and some of the bad information that's been out there about chaos magic. So before we get too deep into anything, probably the best thing that we could do for our listeners is just give us an elevator speech about what is chaos magic to you. How do you define it?
Chaos magic is an experimental, results-driven approach to magical practice. It is very scientific method. The idea is to try things to see if they work, and if they do work, try them again to see if we can get repeatable results or consistent results. The name chaos is kind of a misnomer because it's not chaos as in chaotic or frenetic. It's chaos in terms of potential. You know, the word chaos comes from the ancient Greek chaos, who was the prime intelligence, the first thing that existed that all other existence came out of. So when we talk about chaos magic, it's that idea of trying to unlock potential and create new things. So that is the short version. The long version is that it's kind of honestly whatever you want it to be. It is, again, really just with the idea of experimentation and trying different things and thinking outside of the box, really with that idea of getting results. I think there's a perception of chaos magic and chaos magic practitioners as being sort of lazy and messy. Like we just kind of, it's chaos magic. We half-ass everything. When in fact, the opposite is kind of true. We're trying to work from a very disciplined point of view to figure out the most efficient ways to do things.
Right. And that may be incorporating new technologies or innovations that people who wrote those earlier texts hadn't thought of, or maybe even the world hadn't dreamed up some of these things at that time.
Yeah. And the pioneers of chaos magic really kind of got started in the 1970s, and it was just a very new approach to magical practice. But it wasn't just coming up with things out of thin air. It was taking traditional approaches to magic and traditional forms of magic and doing unexpected things with them. Phil Hine, the author Phil Hine, who is kind of a big name in chaos magic, or he was a big name in chaos magic. He does not practice chaos magic anymore, but he did write a few books on the subject, and he talks about like mapping the Rocky Horror Picture Show onto the Tree of Life and creating a ritual structure around Narnia or around the H.P. Lovecraft mythos. Framework wise, it seems it would look very traditional, but what's happening inside that framework is the weird new different stuff. So just coming at things from different angles.
Yeah, and that all makes, like, that what you just described makes sense to me, because really when we're working with pop culture icons and characters like that, it's kind of like that book American Gods, where today's egregores are the things that we give our attention to, and it's not the gods and goddesses of the old Greek and Roman pantheons. We give our attention to sci-fi characters and fantasy characters, and so if we can use those in magical practice, how is that any different from using one of the gods?
That just randomly made me think of a quick story, and I will try not to tangent too much. But years and years and years ago, I was in a Barnes & Noble, and I saw it was around the holidays, and they had like a gift edition, hardbound edition of American Gods. And it was next to a table full of like little gift sets for baptisms that had like, a little Bible and a little crucifix and a nice little gift box. And I put the American Gods book on that table with all the Bibles and took a picture of it. And I posted it on what we called then Twitter, and wrote, I rearranged some stuff at the bookstore so that all the Bibles would be together. And then I tagged Neil Gaiman because I'm clever and ambitious, and posted it and went on with my day. And a couple hours later, I glanced at my phone and I was like, why do I have 13,000 Twitter notifications? And I opened Twitter and Neil Gaiman had retweeted it. And that was my like one brush with fame, was that Neil Gaiman acknowledged my existence because I called his book a Bible.
That's good. So one of the things that I read in the it was in your introduction, and it caught my eye because it was so similar to something that I had written in my introduction. This book presents a lot of information. Keep what you want, discard what you don't, and I think that approach makes a lot of sense in chaos magic. People are a lot more reticent to think that way when you're talking about ceremonial magic. They think you can't leave anything out. It's all important, isn't it? Well,
Yeah.
that's where this scientific approach you're talking about, I really like that because it causes us to examine these traditions that we think of as infallible or sacrosanct or whatever, and go, well, hold on a second. So what am I really doing here? What is the focus of this ritual? Why am I doing it in this way, using these materials? Could I use something else? Could it be easier? Do I have to make a robe out of a leopard skin? Like, do I have to actually kill a leopard to have this robe? For me, it seems overkill. It seems like these things not only are difficult to acquire now, they were difficult to acquire back when they were written. And this is maybe my own little like conspiracy theory brain popping in, but I tend to think that a lot of these things that were in these old grimoires were there to keep the magic elitist. So
Absolutely.
that only the people who could afford it could practice it. And I think that's bullshit.
That is a tradition that carries on today in a lot of different fields. You see it a lot within divination, actually. I made a TikTok video about this one time because I don't crash out often, but when I do, it's over something very obscure. And in this case, it had to do with all of the taboos and mores around reading tarot. And I do not read tarot myself. That is just not a skill I ever acquired or developed. But, there's like, you can't buy your first tarot deck. Somebody has to give you the deck. And, you have to, and that was the one that really has always rubbed me the wrong way, because that's a way to keep people from reading or from learning how to read. It is, well, if you buy your own decks, then the magic's gone and it won't work for you. So you certainly can't learn how to read, and you certainly can't learn to read better than I read, and you certainly can't take my clients away from me because you're sitting around waiting for somebody to gift you a deck.
Yes.
And there is within, especially when we think of kind of where who was working on these grimoires and when they coalesced, it would have been people with resources and, with the wealth and free time to compile all this information.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't staying up all night after working in the fields all day. They were, they had leisure time, and they had a lot more free time than the peasants did, and they did want to keep it to themselves as much as possible.
And even more than that, and I think you talk about this in your book as well, is like a means of cultural control. Not only do we have magic that can only be performed by people of a certain social stratus that have the wealth to get all of the doodads you need to do it, quote unquote, properly, but they're also splitting it up by gender and saying that this is the magic that men do, and it's high magic, and high magic has a greater, more lofty goal than low magic, which is for women who use whatever's around their home, and that's that's painted as worse or less than. And so there's that whole thing going on too.
Yeah, and there is very much a gender divide of men's magic is, brings one closer to God, and women's magic is consorting with Satan.
Yeah. And
Men get more power, and it's okay. If you give women any power, they're just going to go have sex with the devil. That's something that even in pop culture around the occult is a theme that continues to pop up. That I don't want this to be like, and now back to things that make Thumper crazy. Like, I don't want that to be the whole episode. But there's a movie called Beautiful People or Beautiful Creatures that was based on a novel, and it's like witchcraft in the deep south, and it's very romantic, and it's but the way that witchcraft works, and there's like a big family of witches, and Jeremy Irons is in it. He's the patriarch of the family of witches, and the way it works is that when male witches turn 18, they sort of come into their power, and they become these these leaders. And when women turn 18, female witches turn 18, there's a really good chance they'll go crazy and turn evil. But that only happens to the women. It doesn't happen to the men. And
convenient.
And we can kind of pull that theme out of that particular artifact and go, wow, that's really misogynistic. But that theme is everywhere. And it's very much in the occult, is that there is the high magic and the low magic, and the good magic and the bad magic, and the men's magic and the women's magic, and the women's magic is always bad.
And the weird thing is, once you get into practicing either one, you start realizing that they're both pretty much the same. They're both pretty much the same thing. I mean, there are aspects of high magic that deal with getting tangible results in the now for things that you're working through. I mean, and even things that are quote unquote like women's issues. If you look at the history of Jewish magical amulet making, more than half of the amulets that are constructed are about childbirth or some aspect of creating life. And that's considered high magic, but low magic does a lot of that too. And when you're doing things in the low magic style to better yourself or your situation, you are also connecting more deeply with your concept of the divine. And when you're doing high magic-y things and you're connecting to your concept of the divine, you are also doing things that are going to help you in your immediate situation. So it's like we're really splitting hairs.
We really are. And I think the differentiation that I tend to make, and I mentioned this in the book, is that kind of the difference between the magician and the witch is that the magician is kind of working within a given structure or within a societal structure, mainly for it, even with examples like you mentioned aside, kind of focusing more on their own betterment, where the witch is working outside of those structures and for their own betterment, but also for the benefit of the people around them.
Yes.
And when I say societal structure, that could very much be a tradition. That could very much be, a specific grimoire that one person is working on or working with. But for me, that's sort of the dividing line, and it's less about what is the high magic and what is the low magic, or all the different terms we come up with for it, as much as it's the direction and the goals of the practitioner themselves.
Yeah, and I think those high magic texts would ask us to spend a lot of time alone. The Abermaline operation. What is it? 9 months in the woods by yourself.
Yeah, at a lakefront cottage facing north.
Yeah. And again, who can afford to take 9 months off their life and just go fuck around with magic?
I wish I could. I went through a period of unemployment where I did.
I mean, COVID was kind of that.
There's actually a wonderful. Have you ever seen a movie called A Dark Song?
No, I haven't.
I only bring it up because it's sort of a folk horror film, and it's a very slow burn, and I love it. It's about a woman who has hired a ceremonial magician for reasons that she's kind of obscured, but it turns out that she's hiring him to take her through the entire Abermelin ritual.
Oh.
And so the whole movie is her learning how to do all these things and preparing and going through all these ordeals in order to complete the ritual to get her desire. It's remarkably well done. I think you would love it.
What's it called again?
A Dark Song.
A Dark Song. All right, I'm going to check that one out because that does sound interesting. I would like to see someone's creative vision of what that ritual looks like over time.
It's really it really, I think the way it plays out, I think you will appreciate. I will be bugging you every 3 minutes like an egg timer. Did you watch it yet? Did you watch it yet? What do you think? There's a twist at the end, and I need to talk about the twist at the end. I need you to watch this movie. Time's a wasting.
Well, I'll get on it. I'll get on it quick then. I think that there's a really good application for these chaos magic principles in traditional circles, because really this experimentation stuff you're talking about, I mean, I kind of feel like that's the way we should all be approaching whatever tradition we're following. We should all be looking to see, okay, does this work? How did it do what I wanted it to do? And if it did, well, what if I tweak this and tried it again? Oh, that worked better. Well, let's try it on something else. That's a process that shouldn't we all be doing?
Yeah, I agree. I think we as a community of practitioners, I think we put more emphasis on the will it work than on the what do we do when it works, if that makes sense. There is a lot of moving into an occult space and starting magical practice comes with a certain degree of fear. I know for me, I was 19 years old and I was sitting out on a tiny little balcony at my parents' house, and I had a couple of candles and some incense, and I was going to do my very first witchcraft ritual. And there was a moment of, okay, if you light this candle and you are wrong, you are going to hell. And I was like, fair point. And I lit the candle anyway. And I was just like, I've committed, I've gone this far, I want to see if it works. I want to see what this is. But, that fear takes a little while to let go of. And I think one of the reasons why people, want to follow spells to the letter is that if I do something wrong or if I leave something out, something bad might happen. And the chaos magic perspective on that is, okay, but what's going to happen if I leave this out? Because it's far less likely that something bad is going to happen than it is that the thing is just not going to work the way you want it to. And so, okay, this ritual calls for casting a circle and ringing a bell 5 times. I don't have a bell. Let's just see what happens if I clap my hands. Do we just need a sudden audio noise? Hey, I didn't go up in flames. That seems to work. Oh, look, my spell got my results and I clapped it. So we're going to try it again. Did clapping work this time? Yep, it did. That's where the what if is a good thing. What happens if I leave this out? What if happens if I do things this way? What happens if I don't do this ritual in Latin? What what happens if I do I have to cast a circle? Let's find out. Let's try it both ways. Really just playing with it and coming up with something unique that works really well for you.
Yeah, and I think it's the playing with it that helps you understand the mechanics of it. Because like you said, all right, well, we're not going to do this in Latin. We're going to do it in English. And if it still works, then you have to backtrack and say, well, is it me intoning those particular vowel and consonant sounds that makes it work? Or is it what the word means that makes it work and I can do it in any language? Or is the language, could I just say blah, 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 just make up something as long as the intention behind the words is the same. So you kind of get to strip stuff away and go, well, what is really crucial to what I'm trying to do, and what matters and what doesn't.
Exactly. That is, you nailed it. That's exactly correct.
And I love that approach. I love that approach for every kind of magic, including ceremonial magic, and maybe especially for ceremonial magic, because because there are so many rules, and there's some of them make sense, and then some of them really don't. Like an example that I've used before is in the Greater Key of Solomon, they specify a couple different ways you can make pentacles, and they give you a list of metals you can make them on. They tell you can make them out of different kinds of paper or parchment using special colored inks and all of these things. And as a result of that, we have people in modern day saying, well, that means that you can only make them using a burin or a burin, however you pronounce it. You can't use a Dremel. You can't use a CNC machine. You can't use a laser engraver. And I'm like, dude, if you think the writers of these grimoires wouldn't look at a laser machine and go, that is the most holy way to make pentacles. We are literally concentrating the light of God onto one particular point and using it to change the nature of the metal. Like that would be the most magical, holy thing that they would lose their minds.
Oh, absolutely. It like so many things in our culture, it goes back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where there was in one episode there was the demon who kept bragging that no army could defeat him. And that had been like, that was his thing. Like for 2,000 years or 1,000 years, no army has ever defeated me. And at some point, Buffy's like, oh, he means an army from 1,000 years ago. And she takes him out with a bazooka.
Right. Yeah.
As much as I get into the chaos magic and the Discordianism, I am a fool for ceremony and pomp and circumstance. I was raised Episcopalian, so I like ritual. I like my ritual. But we have to remember too that the people writing the grimoires back in the day were working with the most modern tools at their disposal.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing, especially within folk magic, is where we see a lot of innovation, because people are still working with what they have on hand and not getting caught up in there is one traditional way to do this and we can only do it that way or else.
Mm-hmm. Well, like you were pointing out when we were talking earlier about the pentacles being used in American folk magic pretty early on, because they had gotten these reprints of the grimoires and they were just cutting out the pictures and using them.
Yeah.
Which seems very chaos to me.
Oh, absolutely. There is a metaphysical shop in Houston where I live, that it's very oriented towards like African traditional religions and hoodoo. And as you're walking through the shop, which is an old house, there is this, like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a big sheet of pockets hanging on the wall, and where you can get they photocopied and cut out a bunch of all the different pentacles and have them divided up. So if you need a Pentacle of the Sun, you just grab one out of there and it's $2 and you buy it at the front counter. And and that's a really convenient way to do it. They were hand copying things because Xerox hadn't been invented yet.
Right.
There are I think times that those like things like hand copying or handwriting can be very important, but there are other times where you really can just photocopy something and be fine. Sure.
Or you can do a hybrid of the two. For instance, I've got a product in my shop. It's a papyrus crown that you are supposed to wear when you do the invocation of the Bornless Rite.
Uh-huh.
One of the things I found is when I was doing it by hand, entirely by hand, I was throwing away, and I realized there's no video here, so people won't be able to see what I'm showing about, but Thumper, you will. You can see that, I tried to do this by hand, but I couldn't get the letter spacing right.
Mm-hmm.
So what I ended up doing was actually writing it on there with the laser and then going back and like backfilling the laser etchings with the ink. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. It looks nice and it has the hand touch. And so I think we can look at our practice whatever the practice is, and say like, yeah, man, is there a way we could do this better, smarter, faster, cheaper? And there always is.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And there are times to, like I said, there are times to stick with the tradition and times to embrace the innovation. And I will say, like, in coming out of an initiatory tradition, there was a whole thing about, like, we hand copy the Book of Shadows. You have to copy the whole thing by hand. And I loved that experience because I had to sit there and really read everything
Mm-hmm.
and really immerse myself in all these things that have been passed down through this tradition to wind up with me. And so I really loved hand copying. I thought it was, I wasn't doing it because that's the way you're supposed to do it. I was doing it because it was very immersive for me and very kind of touching in some ways to really like write down things that I know that somebody however many years ago had written down. But when I'm doing Gardnerian rituals with my coven, I'm usually using the photocopies because
Yeah.
the print's big and easy to read. I loved getting to have that experience, but I'm also, when it comes to the ritual itself, I'm going to do what's the most efficient. There's definitely room for both.
Absolutely. And I likewise, when I first got into magical practice, I think my first real entree was doing stuff with runes, and I really wanted to learn that language, that set. And so I got a dedicated journal, and I copied the rune poem word for word in its native language, and the translation and everything else. Was very, very dutiful and diligent about it. But I don't look at that journal ever.
Yeah.
The act of doing the handwriting, that was the value. That was the magic right there.
Yeah.
Was doing that, engaged my body and my mind in the activity, and it's what I needed at that time. And now that I know the runes like the back of my hand, I don't need any of that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I just want to do it quick. So, like you said, there's value to that. And curiously, in the Greater Key, one of the things that the authors there said, they were talking about astrological preparations, right? And they said that observing the hours and days is a necessary activity for a novice, but an adept can dispense with it, because they said that exercise was, and I'm paraphrasing, is basically just to build confidence in the novice. Once you have the confidence, you don't need to observe all the rules. And they even say in the Greater Key, once you're an adept, you can decide what needs to be dispensed with. And I'm going, okay, if in the definitive text they're telling us we can improvise once we get the hang of it, then
Yeah.
why are we being so snooty about it?
Yeah. Because not everybody reads the definitive text. If the history of Wicca has taught us anything, it is that not everybody reads everything they should. That is sort of part of just magic itself, is that, and it used to, something that used to make me apoplectic back in the day of when we were all on the listservs, was somebody would ask about ritual tools and somebody else would say, oh, my dear, I haven't used ritual tools in ages. They are crutches. You don't need them. And it's like, well, no, you might not need them, but it's not a crutch to the new person. It is part of the learning experience. And you can put a nail in the wall with the palm of your hand, or you can use a shoe, or you can use a hammer. They're all going to get the job done. One is going to cause you physical harm. One is going to get the job done efficiently. Over the course of many years, if you build up some calluses, sure, you can slam a nail into the wall with your hand, no problem. But you got to get there. And a crutch is a tool itself. Like, there is nothing wrong with crutches.
No. If you hurt your leg, you need one. And that's kind of where we all start in magical practice, right? We're all a little hobbled, if by nothing else than by our preconceptions and all the baggage that we bring into the tradition from wherever we came from. Like for me, it was Catholic upbringing, and there was a lot of disgorging of information that needed to happen before I could take on new information and kind of embrace a broader view of spirituality on the whole. and tools are a part of that. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, hopefully hanging on to the saints because they come in handy.
They do. And and I haven't totally tossed out Jesus and Mary either. I just have a different relationship with them than I used to.
Yeah. I like I said earlier, I was raised Episcopalian and we went to church every Sunday and I was in the choir and I was very devout, or at least I thought I was growing up. And at some point, especially when I got older and started kind of exploring paganism and looking into witchcraft, and I was sort of expecting like Christian guilt to be a stumbling block. And I was like, oh, after all those years, I never actually developed any kind of relationship with Jesus, which was sort of the point. So it was really easy for me to just set it aside and move forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I, as much as I liked the ritual and I loved the hymns, I saw the church itself as sort of, even as a kid, as sort of this political organization. And that always bothered me. So I didn't have an upbringing where I had a lot of religious trauma.
Mm-hmm.
I still had some weird hangups and I still had to really work on the idea of deconditioning because we live in a culture that is defined by Protestant ethics. So we, even if we're like, oh, I'm spiritual, not religious, we still have to untangle ourselves from those at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just was like, oh yeah, I don't really know Jesus. That's like whether or not he loves me is none of my business, and I just moved on. And but I'm very lucky and privileged in that way because a lot of people come into witchcraft with a lot of baggage and a lot of religious trauma, and that's really hard to let go of.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So not really having a personal relationship with Jesus allowed you to move on to these other forms of spirituality. And then when did you come in contact with Eris, who features prominently in your book? Because she seems to be an object of veneration for you.
She is. So I've also probably been saying her name wrong for decades, so I'm just going to keep mispronouncing it because it's where I'm comfortable. But no, I've always said Eris, but your pronunciation is actually correct from a
Oh,
Greek
I
point
didn't
of
I
view.
didn't know which was which.
I think it's probably like Eris, like the epsilon kind of sounds like an AI sometimes, but I think either is fine. It's like Hecate. People say it three different ways. She knows when we're talking about her. It's fine. But as a kid, I was a big Greek mythology buff. As like I think every little queer kid who grows up to practice witchcraft, I had a thing for Greek mythology, and I I never remember the name of the book, but it was this Greek mythology book for kids, and it was like had these beautiful illustrations, and it was like Baudelaire or something, Book of Greek Mythology. And there was a whole thing on the Judgment of Paris and how the Trojan War started with a little segment on Eris. And Eris looked absolutely unhinged in the illustrations, and I just thought that was great. And so she was just my favorite. Like for whatever reason, as a kid, she was my favorite. And as an adult, especially when I started exploring witchcraft, and then at some point I decided I wanted to look into. I'd gotten very interested in Wicca and witchcraft, but like half the people I met said Wicca was 10,000 years old, and the other half said it was invented in 1957. And I was like, I want to figure out where this thing came from. So I got involved, or I tracked down a Gardnerian coven and started studying with them. And one of the books on their reading list was Drawing Down the Moon by Margot Adler. And there was a chapter on the Discordians, who were these guys starting in the early 1960s, who created this parody religion around the worship of Eris. And I thought that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard of in my entire life. And this was the days of the Yahoo group, so I immediately found a Discordian Yahoo group, and I was like, these people are nuts, and just left. I was like, no, nothing that just happened is okay. And I booked out of there. But I got a hold of the Principia Discordia, which was like the Discordian holy text, and just kind of kind of had a quiet little appreciation for Eris on my own. And then at some point, really, I don't know exactly what triggered it specifically. It just, at some point, I just started really taking Discordianism seriously. And I think part of it was as I was getting more into chaos magic and realizing that although chaos magic really originated in England, when it made it over to the US, it was heavily influenced by Discordianism. So that kind of pulled me back into learning more about it. And I just started approaching it as like, okay, I'm just gonna, I know this is all was all set up as a joke. I'm gonna approach it like a real religion. I'm gonna approach it deadly seriously. And I just kind of fell in love with it again and have been Discordianing along ever since.
Well, what are kind of the some of the guiding principles of Discordianism?
So there are we do have the what's called the Pentabarf, or like the Five Commandments. I don't remember them all off the top of my head, which is okay because Discordianism is very laid back that way. But the fifth commandment is that a Discordian is prohibited from believing anything he reads. So, the final rule after you read the rest of the commandments is you're not allowed to believe any of this. So it's very much a belief in no belief, or believing whatever you want. The main thing I get out of it is the understanding that there really is only one binary in the world, which is creation and destruction, and that everything else, everything that we think of as polar opposites, are really bimodalities, which is like, if you think of, I always think of like, if we think of male and male is a big blue dot and female is a big pink dot, there are going to be some things that land squarely in the center of either one of those, but there's also going to be some things that are kind of male but not really, and some things that are kind of female, not really, and there's going to be some things that are kind of both. So there's going to be, even though you have these two very clear dots, there's going to be a lot of pink and blue and purple splatter paint all around them as we try to kind of figure out where everything else is. And so bimodalities really have fuzzy edges, and they're very arbitrary. Mm-hmm. We know what male and female are is because we as a collective society have decided what male and female means. Most people would say a binary is like order and disorder. That's always the example that's used within Discordianism, but order and disorder are also arbitrary, and they're also bimodalities. And according to Discordianism, the big problem with our culture is that we stopped seeing creation and destruction as the only binary, and we now see order and disorder as the only binary, when they're artificial and subjective and not really a binary at all.
Yeah, I mean, if my wife, and she has commented before on the state of my workshop, which I consider to be fairly ordered, she walks in and she's like, "This is just complete chaos. How can you find anything?" And I'm like, because I know where everything is.
No, that's the perfect example, because it's like we've all had that coworker whose desk is like a dumpster fire, but they know where everything is. And from the outside perspective, this is incredibly disordered. But from the perspective of the coworker, it's like, no, this is absolutely ordered. I know where everything is, and it's all conveniently placed. And that was, for me, that was sort of this like awakening moment of going, oh wow, all of this is subjective. Everything that we think of as concrete and absolute, we think that because we've all agreed to think that. That really, sometimes that's scary. It's like, okay, well, this thing is, the law says that because we all say the law says that. If we all collectively changed our minds, that would end poorly, but so much of what we think of as reality is just a majority of people agreeing that this is the way it is.
Yeah, we could change the definitions of masculine and feminine tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, and the definitions of masculine and feminine have changed repeatedly over centuries.
Right.
And like what we think of as like very masculine today, in ancient Greece would have been like, oh, that's awful and barbarous. That is not manly at all. Look at him with his hairy chest and oversized penis. It's like,
yeah.
I probably could have saved that example for some other time. But
it illustrates the point.
Yeah. And, you know, when we think of like, you know, of men wearing like high heels being the height of men's fashion at one point,
Sure,
you know,
and they wore pantyhose and little skirts too.
well, and like even cigarettes, like we think of like the Marlboro Man, that's he was so manly. Cigarettes up until fairly recently in the history of things were men smoked pipes or cigars, women smoked cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
That was a way for women to delicately enjoy tobacco. And then by the 80s, it was the manly thing to do. So it switches constantly. One, you know, in 20 years, something that we think of as incredibly feminine today, or like painting nails, where men paint their nails now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there are people who freak out about that, but there are a lot of big burly manly men who like their little glitter nails. And so it's always shifting. It's never going to be static.
Yeah, so we can't call it an absolute, and it would make sense that creation and destruction are pretty mutually exclusive. You can't do them both at the same time.
I mean, they can occur simultaneously, but they're still two very distinct things. Like, you know, it's the Big Bang, that's destruction, but creation comes out of it. Right. You know, like they're ongoing things, but from the Discordian perspective, that is the only binary. That's the only thing where you can say this is absolutely creation and this is absolutely destruction.
No,
Everything else has wiggle room.
I could buy into that. That makes
Excellent. I got another one. I get a toaster.
it makes good sense to me.
That's what's so funny about Discordianism is that it really was created as this parody of organized religion. And like one of the rules is from the Five Commandments is that you can't eat hot dog buns on Fridays because Catholics aren't allowed to eat fish on Fridays, so Discordians don't eat hot dog buns. And there's just a lot of like absurdity in that, or like throughout the text, throughout the Principia Discordia, there's all these weird things. There's a few jokes that just did not age very well because it was written by these two stoners in the 60s. But at the same time, there's this like really no nonsense philosophy behind it that I don't know that they knew that they were creating something that was so sensical. And like the number 5 is important in Discordianism just because it is. Like there's no reason for it. Just the number 5 is sacred. And they at one point they give a date of the antagonist, Greyface, he's this dour figure, and he shows up in, I want to say, 1163 or 1193 or something like that. Some specific date is when Greyface appeared and ruined everything for everybody because he didn't want to have fun anymore. But when you actually look at the date, if you add up the numbers, it adds up to 5. So that, you know, they picked that date because it added up to 5. But historically, it coincides with the collapse of the late Bronze Age. And they may not have known that when they picked the date. They picked the date because everything had to add up to 5. So you know, there was guidance to what they were doing, whether or not they realized it.
Yeah, and there's a bit of a tradition of that too in magical literature. Like the primary text that most demonologists use to identify, especially the spirits of the Goetia, is by Johann Weir, called the Pseudographia Daemonium, as I believe what it is pronounced.
That's not a drag name.
Yeah, it's a big one. But what I learned about studying this text is that he wrote it as a jab to all of these people who believed in angels and demons, and he wrote it to say, like, look at all of the stupid shit these people believe.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But now we use it as a source text.
That is, that pleases me on like a deep visceral level. And it's funny how things sort of become real that way, where something that when Margot Adler was one of the founders of Discordianism had passed away at the time that she was working on Drawing Down the Moon. But when she interviewed the other one, she was asking him, do you really believe in Eris? Do you really believe all this stuff? And he related a story about his friend, the co-founder, who had once said, if I knew all this was going to come true, I would have picked Venus. Because what started out as a joke really became their religion. and it became very real to them. And they were having very real experiences with this goddess that they picked because they thought it was hilarious that the Greeks had a goddess of discord. And that's what sparked the whole thing, was that they thought that was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. And, from 1960, that's 1959. And then today I'm publishing this book on how to work with Eris.
Yeah. I mean, the gods and goddesses have a way of doing that.
They really do. They really absolutely do.
Well, they find a way to make something productive out of human absurdity, which is great because there's such an abundance of it. I mean,
I tell a story.
We're really absurd creatures. Like it's a core aspect of humanity to be absurd.
It absolutely, even just in looking at like human anatomy and physiology, there are so many things about the human body that should not work or that should not make sense. And yet we function. And, it's like our meat suits on our skeletons are being run by like 5 pounds of salt and fat in our head.
Yeah. Weird.
And like all of creation, all of civilization came out of like this jellied little jumble, and it's just weird to think about. And we don't make sense, and we have weird reactions to things, and we pack bond with Roombas, and we do all this weird stuff. So it does make sense that the gods would capitalize on that to get us to do what they need us to do.
Yeah, they're working with what they got.
I tell a story in the introduction of the book, and which I think ties into what we're discussing, which is when I knew that Llewellyn wanted me to submit something. I'd been blogging for Patheos Pagan for a couple of years at this point, and I'd been in communication with an editor at Llewellyn, and I had already been tapped to work on the Sun Sign series for Virgo Witch. I was gonna like co-write that. But I knew they wanted me to submit a proposal for a full-length book. And I really just was like very intimidated by that. This is too much to ask. Like, they're not going to say yes. And if they do say yes, I can't write a full book. This is beyond me. And one day my blog stopped working. And it was the weirdest way it stopped working. I could upload a post, but Patheos is set up to where like every 2 or 3 hours, their Facebook feeds refresh. And so if you look at the Patheos Pagan Facebook page, it'll have a cover photo of the blog post and the title, and then you click on the link. So you can see who wrote the post and all this stuff. And I uploaded a post, and when I went to look at it on Facebook, there was just an unmarked link that said patheos.com. And if you clicked on it, it went to my blog post, but you couldn't see that it was me. And so I emailed tech support at Patheos and was like, hey, what's going on? And they were like, well, we'll look into this. That's odd. And I wrote another blog post, and the same thing happened. And just for whatever reason, my blog was just functionally broken. I couldn't get any social media engagement off of it because the links weren't working. And so I emailed them back, and they were like, we don't know what's going on. It is just your blog. Every other blog we host works fine. Yours does not. And I thought about that, and I said, okay. And I sat down, I banged out a proposal, I submitted it, and then I wrote a blog post that was like, I think Eris is preventing my blog from publishing until I turn in my book proposal, and submitted that post, and it appeared twice in the Patheos feed.
Well, there's your sign.
Yeah. And so it's like, I go through periods where I'm very agnostic and borderline atheist, where it's just like, is any of this real? I don't know. Maybe I'm going through the motions, but then I'm like, no, an ancient Greek goddess broke your blog so you would write a book about her. Like, that's hard. Like, I can't turn my nose up at that.
I agree. I mean, and I go through similar phases too, where it's hard not to, because we're human, right? And we're dealing with the unseen and the unknown and the at sometimes just ununderstandable, and we're trying to make sense of it, right? And so it's only natural at some point to be like, God, is this even real? But then, yeah, it's those experiences that anchor us. I think when I was first getting into doing occult practice, like for real, for serious, I was kind of coming out of a stint where I was teaching for a long time. And what had happened was I was teaching through this nonprofit along with half of everything else in the country. COVID killed that because
Yeah.
it's really hard to teach songwriting over Zoom. And I'm trying to figure out what am I going to do with my life now, and then this guy just shows up out of nowhere, and he goes, "Well, yeah, I mean, I spent my life doing CNC. You ever done CNC machining?" I'm like, never even heard of it. Took me to his garage, showed me how to do a bunch of stuff, and he goes, "Tell you what, I will give you a CNC machine if you record my wife in your studio because she loves to sing."
Oh.
And I was like, "Sure thing, man. That sounds great." And we had some other business deal that was going on, and that ended up falling through. But what stuck was the CNC bit, and now that's my business,
Mm-hmm.
is doing occult CNC machining.
That is amazing.
And that never would have happened if I hadn't gone on that little journey with that guy and had this like weird little relationship. And I feel like the spirits that I was working with at the time to figure out what to do with my life, they're like, "We're not going to tell you. We're just going to dump it in your lap and hope you figure it out."
Yes.
And that was one of the first times that I felt that, wow, this magic really worked, A, and B, these spirits are doing shit to my life.
Yeah.
Like, they're helping me out in a real and tangible way, and they just changed the course of my life pretty drastically by just putting me in touch with the right person at the right time, and the right conversation happened. And so yeah, man, it's those experiences that we hold on to, and in those times of doubt, and keep us strong in whatever practice we're working with.
Yeah.
So if you were to be talking to somebody who's standing in a bookstore looking at all the great books that there are to buy and chaos apples on the shelf, what would you tell them they're going to get out of this book so that they want to pick yours?
I would tell them it would, the question would vary based on the audience, like who's standing there. But if it was like somebody who's maybe a little younger, who's getting into witchcraft and they're learning a lot from TikTok and social media, and I would say this book will explain what a chaos witch actually is, because the term chaos witch has gotten very popular on Witch Talk, on the witchy side of TikTok and in social media, without definition.
Sure.
Where people are like, "Oh, I'm a chaos witch. What does that mean?" Chaos. Like there's a whole like backstory of how the term became popular, but it's one of those things. It's like shadow work, where people will say, "Oh, do your shadow work." What is shadow work? I don't know. Just do it. These terms get popular, and there's an explanation does not always come along with them. So one thing I really wanted to do with this book is, if you're interested in being a chaos witch and practicing chaos witchcraft, you can do it with this book. You will have a clear understanding of what it means when you call yourself that.
Yeah, that's good. Because, we do tend to do that, right? Call ourselves something and not really know the entirety of what that means, which I think traditional religion kind of prepares us for that in several ways, where you're told to identify as, I'll use my personal example. I was told to identify as a Catholic before I was confirmed.
Yeah.
And when I was confirmed, I was not yet old enough to know what the hell that meant.
Yeah.
To understand the gravity of what it was I was committing to at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a thing that I was doing because my parents said, "You're in Sunday school and you're 11, and now this is the age where you go through confirmation class." So, even going through all that training, I still got to a point where I was calling myself Catholic without knowing what that meant.
Yeah.
And I didn't really understand what being Catholic meant until I finished school, went to a Catholic college, and then went and lived in a Catholic monastery for a while, because after I lived with people who literally lived their values, I was like, "Oh, this is what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now here I am, like 21, 22 years old, just figuring out what it means to be called the thing I have called myself my entire life.
Yeah.
That's not an unusual story, I don't think. And then to break off from that and go to these decentralized traditions where there's a lot less quote unquote regulation about who's in positions of authority and who's not, it's even easier to fall into that trap of saying, I belong to this tradition or that tradition, and you don't. And sometimes it can get problematic too, like when you see white people saying that they are voodoo priests and priestesses, like, oh no, you're not.
I mean, it can happen, but it takes a lot more effort than people realize, and because I have known people throughout my life who are of European descent, but who are initiated practitioners of African traditional religions. And in one case, he snuck into Cuba and like went through an initiation in Cuba, and then came home and had to wear nothing but white for like a year and a half,
Mm-hmm.
while still holding down like a high-end tech job. He would have to like go to work every day. He just had to figure out how he was going to wear white to work every single day. I knew a guy who, I didn't know how he got into Haiti, but a hurricane hit, and he was like trapped in a tent in Haiti going through an initiation during a hurricane. So I was just like, you win, dude. You win everything. Like,
but he did the work. He went through the initiation.
No,
yeah.
And he had to do additional work because it was a culture that he was not inherently a part of. So he had to, the burden of proof was on him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what a lot of white people don't realize when they get interested in diasporic religions, or when they get interested in hoodoo or whatever. Like, we have a lot of burden of proof. We have to prove that we're not going to come in just to take stuff and exploit it and market it and cut the original culture out of whatever we're going to try to make money off of.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And if we can prove all that, then we can go through the initiations, and we also never get to be in charge. That's the kicker. It's like, we are not born into the culture, so we do not get to take over. We can participate to the extent that we have been granted privilege to, but yeah, we don't. That's it. That's the extent of what we get to do.
And I think that there are plenty of people who don't really explore the issue even that far.
Yeah.
And so I think taking a step to say, no, this is what a chaos witch is, and this is what a chaos witch isn't, and let's be clear about our terms. I think you do a great job delineating the difference between a chaos witch and an eclectic witch.
Thank you.
Which I appreciated, because those terms, they feel kind of interchangeable, but they're not.
They really do. There are similarities, but I think it ultimately comes down to how individually they approach belief. Because within a chaos paradigm, when working with any permutation of chaos magic, there's an idea that belief is a tool that we can. Just like you're going to pick the right tool to build something, you're going to pick the right belief for whatever magic you're trying to accomplish. And I always fall back in the same example, and I don't think I put this example in the book, but I have mentioned it anytime I get to talk about chaos magic, so I might as well have. If I find an old book of like Irish folklore, in fact, I've got one on my dining table right now, Lady Wilde's Mystic Charms, Irish Cures, Mystic Charms and Superstitions, that was published by Oscar Wilde's mom in the late 1800s.
That's cool.
And there's all these cool little bits of folklore and stuff, but like there's a spell to turn invisible, and it takes a lot of work. You have to kill a raven with a black hafted knife and cut out its heart. And then you take a bean and you put the bean in the heart, and then you plant it. And when the bean sprouts, then you eat a bean off the tree or off the plant, and then you can turn invisible. So like you really have to be committed to this. And like praying to Satan the whole time, right? Because it was folklore collected by predominantly Catholic people, and clearly this was evil. And so I'm reading this and like I'm like, okay, I want to do this. I'm gonna take the time to grow my beanstalk and turn invisible. But the book says I have to pray to Satan. I'm pagan. I don't really, want to work with Satan as an archetype. So I'm gonna pray to Dionysius because he's a god of vegetation. And maybe he will help with that. Or maybe I'll pray to Hades because Hades could turn invisible. That was part of his thing. So I'll just substitute prayers to Hades for Satan. And that's going to take some, rewriting and finagling and reconciliation. It would be a lot easier just to worship Satan for 5 minutes to eat the bean.
Yes.
It just would be a lot easier to convert to theistic Satanism just for a little bit, eat the bean, turn invisible, spit the bean out, and then I can be pagan again. And so that's where belief is a tool. And so like within eclectic witchcraft, we are assembling a practice around belief, but within chaos witchcraft, we are assembling beliefs around practice. Here's what I want to do. What do I need to believe in order to activate this?
It's a good distinction. It's really at the heart of whatever it is we're doing. But to think of belief as being one of the things you can vary.
Yeah.
That's
beliefs
novel.
Their beliefs are subjective truths. And, if I believe something, then I am accepting this as true until something happens that maybe makes me think otherwise. So like I was raised in a very Republican household during the glory days of Ronald Reagan, where everything's going to be great because Reagan's president and trickle down economics are a wonderful idea. And we don't talk about AIDS, right? Like and so I was raised in this very, only Republican household. And then Bill Clinton got elected president. And there was a part of me that was like very scared for the nation. Like I was like, oh no, a Democrat, will we survive? I was in high school going, oh no, this is terrifying. But at the same time, my parents listened to a lot of Rush Limbaugh when we would go on trips. And as I was subjected to that, he would say things and I would go, wait, that's not true. That doesn't make sense. And so because of Rush Limbaugh, I stopped thinking Republican was the default. And, I always thought of Republican as like the good politics and Democrats were the bad politics because that's the way I'd been raised. That's what I'd been raised to believe. But in listening to somebody espousing Republican beliefs, I was like, oh no, I disagree with all of this. And so I stopped believing. So my belief flipped and I started seeing progressive politics as, okay, no, that makes much more sense to me. And so our beliefs change all the time, whether we realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like I really dislike Taylor Swift on principle, but man, that folklore album was amazing. Like it
was good, wasn't it?
Yeah. I am not a full-blown Swiftie, but I do appreciate a good Taylor Swift song now and again. And she seems very happy in her engagement. They seem like a couple that are just really good buddies as well as being happily engaged. So that makes me happy. But like, I used to think like when Lady Gaga first came out, I was like, oh, clearly a tool of the patriarchy. Right? This is just mass marketed whatever. And then like a few years later, I was like, oh, and her jazz album is phenomenal. Like what I used to believe about Lady Gaga and what I believe about Lady Gaga now are very different things. And it organically shifted. The chaos trick is like shifting those beliefs on cue.
Mm-hmm.
And shifting those beliefs when a specific belief is going to be more effective towards my goals. I talk about lithomancy in the book, which is kind of my go-to method of divination, just divination with stones. And when I was first learning about lithomancy, it was like, okay, I need crystals, but I'm not a crystal witch. I don't have crystals. It's just not my thing. And so I tore my apartment apart and I found a jar of antique marbles that had belonged to my dad and my grandfather. And I was like, okay, the book is saying that it doesn't really matter what the stones are. You're just going to ascribe meanings to these individual stones, but the stones can be whatever stones you want. I choose to believe that stone is a small object of roughly similar size and shape to some other small objects. And I'm going to work with this theory that, I'm choosing to believe that I can use these marbles for divination. And it worked. And so I read with marbles for a while, and then I started reading with gaming dice because I was like, the stone is, it's like it's like the Matrix. There is no spoon. There is no stone. A stone is whatever I want a stone to be. That's how I learned lithomancy, was with marbles and dice. And then eventually I begrudgingly got some stones. And which worked fine now. But, I shifted my belief in order to accomplish my goal. Instead of waiting until I could get a hold of some stones, I was like, I'm going to make stones happen.
Yeah, no, I like that. I like that way of working. And if I'm being honest, that's kind of how I approach doing ceremonial stuff as well. Because when I'm looking at whatever ritual I'm going to do, the chances that I have everything I need on hand are like 0.
Yeah.
And even though I've got a lot of the doodads, right? And I've got a lot of the special incenses and stuff. And even though I have them, I don't necessarily even use them how I'm supposed to use them.
Yeah.
Because I'll get to the ritual and go, you know what? I just don't think that angel would like that. I think they'd like this better. I don't know why I'd think that. Maybe it's, maybe they're telling me that, or I'm just projecting onto them, or maybe I just like the smell better. I don't know. But yeah, I make substitutions all the time.
I think trusting your gut on things like that is very important to magical practice. And I know that I don't know if he made it into the Catholicism that you were raised with, but I'm a big fan of Saint Expedite, who is the patron saint of procrastinators. And you pray to him on Wednesdays, and you offer him pound cake and flowers. If he comes through, I'll give you pound cake and flowers. And he had come through for me on something, and so I'd done the requisite get on Facebook and praise him, because you have to praise him in print, and classified ads don't really exist anymore. So occasionally, if you're flipping through social media on Threads or Blue Sky or whatever, you will see somebody just singing the praises of Saint Expedite because I got his name in print. That's what I'm supposed to do. And traditionally, he likes red roses. So I had gone into a Whole Foods because I knew they had a floral department. I was like, I'm just going to pick up, half a dozen roses. And I saw these red chrysanthemums. And I had such a strong, physical reaction to the chrysanthemums, which, I generally don't have reactions to flowers, but I was like, those are the most gorgeous chrysanthemums I've ever seen in my natural life. And I was like, which tells me that Expedite would prefer the chrysanthemums.
Yes.
If I'm coming in here looking specifically for roses, and all I can think about is these other flowers, those are the ones he probably wants. I mentioned that to a friend. I said something about blah, 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 Saint Expedite got him some chrysanthemums. And they're like, you're supposed to get him roses. And I was like, well, he wanted chrysanthemums. You tell him he has to have roses. I'm not going to tell him he has to have roses.
And how do you know he's not? How do you know he's not hanging out going, God, another rose? Jeez, what I wouldn't give for a gladiolus or a lily.
After it, when we were talking earlier about kind of those doubts that happen, is any of this real? Are there really, the gods? After I'd done this big work into Expedite, and I was trying to get a book to arrive quickly that a friend of mine was going to send, and it all worked out brilliantly, and the book arrived safely. And I was thinking, though, I was like, okay, did this really happen because I prayed to Saint Expedite? Did this really happen quickly and efficiently? And did I really get what I want because I asked an imaginary folk saint? Because he's one of those saints that nobody's ever really been able to prove exist, right? Or existed in physical form. And I was like, there may be a lot of psychosomatic stuff going on here. You have convinced yourself that the saint helped you when it's really just the mail showed up when the mail's going to show up. And I was kind of having this weird crisis of faith over it, right? And I was at work. I worked in an office at the time, and I was at the front desk, and this woman walks in, and said and asked for me by name, and I was like, "That's me." And she said, "Um, this package arrived for you, and it was left on our doorstep, but then the pandemic happened, and so it's just been in our office for the past 6 months." And it was something I'd ordered that I had assumed was lost in the mail because it was showing up as delivered. And the day that I suddenly started doubting Saint Expedite, who was also associated with mail, was the day some lady remembered, oh, wait, I need to give this to that guy down the hall.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, as I'm going, oh, I don't think Saint Expedite is real at all. Hey, here's all the stuff that was lost in the mail that was here the whole time. And I was like, never
Perfect.
mind. You get chrysanthemums whenever you would like.
Exactly.
Who wants pound cake? I know I do. Let's get lots of pound cake.
Everybody loves pound cake.
That's traditionally, that's what he likes. He likes Sara Lee pound cake.
Well, one for me and one for thee.
My ex, they used to make my ex crazy, is that he would open the freezer and he'd be like, oh, pound cake. And I was like, no, that's not for you. That's not for us. We're saving that. I'll get you your own pound cake. You're not touching that pound cake.
Well, I know that you said that you can't tell us too much about what you've got coming in the works, but maybe could you give us a little teaser?
I am currently, I've just started working on, I think I said this earlier, sort of as a spiritual sequel to the Chaos Apple. That's going to get into some mythology and pop culture and devotional work, really around just Eris herself, and just kind of exploring her on her own outside of Discordianism or anything else. Just looking at her and her influence in the world.
I think that'll be fantastic because I tell you one of the takeaways that I got from reading the Chaos Apple was that this Eris is somebody I need to know more about. I want to know more. I want to hang out with her.
She is much more prominent than people realize, and she's been, and we see her in pop culture, like The Adventures of Billy and Mandy and the Sinbad in the Seven Seas movie, that cartoon movie that came out where Michelle Pfeiffer played Eris. So we see representations of her, but pretty much anytime we see an apple in a fairy tale, it is because of Eris. Where like when you think of Snow White in the the apple, and people always take that to be a very Christian thing, like it's the forbidden fruit. But the forbidden fruit, like if we think biblically, the forbidden fruit was probably a fig.
Mm-hmm.
Like when you look back at early biblical translations and stuff, it was a fig. And when John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, that's the first time we ever see an apple referenced as the forbidden fruit. And he picked the apple because it was so prominent in Greek mythology as the golden apple of discord that no one could resist. So because of Milton using Eris's apple as the new forbidden fruit, anytime in any fairy tale, whenever the forbidden fruit is mentioned or whenever an apple is mentioned, that is Eris.
I will be on the lookout for that now.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I had heard that the fruit in the garden was likely not an apple, but what you're saying makes total sense because what does Christian mythology do best if not borrow from everyone else?
Well, and when you were talking about the source of all this ceremonial magic and demonology that was like this kind of fictional work or just this satirical work, so much of Christian mythology is based on Paradise Lost and Dante's Inferno.
Oh yeah.
And so we all the whole idea of pop culture deities is not new. The Christians were doing it long before the Chaos Magicians were.
Mm-hmm. We were having a conversation about purgatory at dinner tonight with my family, and we were going around because like we don't really raise our kids in any religious tradition. We kind of just tell them that if you're curious, we're happy to take you to whatever type of service you want to check out, and you can make your own decisions when you're older. So one of the things we were at, like, do you believe in purgatory? And a couple of the kids were like, yeah, of course I do. And I was like, well, you realize that was just invented by a medieval Italian poet. Like, there's no theology underlying that. It's just his imagination, and the theology to support it came like long after the book was published, and the church had already decided that they believed in purgatory because of this book, and now they had to create theology to justify it. And I was like, said, do you believe in purgatory now? And two of them were like, well, no. And my youngest one was like, yeah, I still think so.
Yeah, that's fair.
And there's room for all that, but I think it is interesting, like, how much of the mythos of some of these world religions that we feel like they're so stable, they're so established, they've got elements that are just as weird and wacky and come from just regular media sources. Because having theology based on Dante's Inferno would be like us nowadays saying, I think I would like to make some religious tenets based on Lord of the Rings.
Yes.
And then we just take Lord of the Rings really seriously. And,
Well, there is a Church of the Jedi, and Klingon Wicca exists. So, like, why not Lord of the Rings?
Well, yeah, I guess we're back to the absurdity of humanity asserting itself. So is there a good place where listeners can connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. My website is thumperforge.com, and I think that has links to my blog, which is called Fivefold Law at Patheos Pagan. And then my username on every platform is Fivefold Law.
Okay.
And so I am on. I'm not on what we used to call Twitter, but I'm on pretty much everything else except for Snapchat because I can't remember my password. And I can't remember which email address I used to sign up for Snapchat. So don't look for me there. I'm still Fivefold Law there. It just, I can't get in.
Just nothing there.
But TikTok is where I do my greatest and worst work. That is where I go to. I will get on TikTok and I'll be like, I'm going to unleash a hot take and get canceled. And I'll say something that I think is incredibly controversial. And then the comments from people going, when you think about it, that's true. Yeah. Huh. Interest. Yeah. I agree. Well said. And I'm like, what do I have to do to make Gen Z hate me? Like, this is so not easy. But TikTok is where I have the most fun.
I wish I had answers for you. I'll ask my Gen Z kids, and I'll see if there's anything, if there's any like inviolable laws lines that you could cross. And if I find out, I'll get back to you.
People will occasionally come at me and they'll be like, threefold law, that's because that's a big, like, everybody hates the threefold law right now. And so whenever somebody gets worked up, I'm just like, that comes from like a 1949 pulp novel, right? And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, it comes from a work of fiction. It's not a thing.
Yep.
And so I like exploding little minds that way. That a little cold hard truth never hurt anyone.
No, it's a good thing to do, and so listeners, you can find these truths and more at Fivefold Law. Well, thank you so much for being on. It was a great discussion. I'm so glad you came by and hung out for a bit.
I had a blast. You were my new favorite person. This was great.
It's good to make friends.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me babble and prattle on.
That's what we're here for: babbling and prattling, and occasional carousing.
Excellent. Carousing for everyone.
Until next time, take a bite out of that chaos apple.